right. Okay. Well, it's 6 o'clock, so I guess we're getting started here. Thanks, gang. So for anyone who's watching, welcome to the August 26th, 2020 edition of MIT Enterprise Forum's community stream. We're really lucky to have Henry. Here's some feedback, maybe that's somebody else. Okay. We're really lucky to have Henry Xie here today. He is the CEO of Simple Fractal, and we're going to hear a little bit about RPA, which I will let the expert explain to you. But yeah, this is super casual, probably, very much a Q&A type discussion with everybody who might be watching. And thanks to Gang and the MIT Enterprise Forum for letting us do this. So Henry, I'm actually going to let you introduce yourself maybe, and then take it away and lead us on a journey through RPA.
Sure. Thank you, Sami, and thank you, Gang, for organizing. So yeah, my name is Henry Xie. I am the founder and CEO of Simple Fractal. Big part of what we do is we build software robots to automate back office processes, primarily in healthcare, but also other industries. And so I figured I'd share a little bit about what the landscape looks like today, why so many companies are interested in RPA, what it can do, what its limitations are, and kind of what I see the future state to be. So I guess I can just go ahead, I can share my screen. I just had a couple of visuals to go with it. All right. So what we're experiencing is basically a paradigm shift. And most people think of software as tools. They're digital tools. You may use a online banking system, or you may use Excel for spreadsheets, or you may use email, whatever. These are all digital tools that make our lives easier, but they're still operated by humans. The paradigm shift that's happening is now we can think of software as operators. So instead of just software being yet another tool, now we can build software robots to operate existing or other software tools. And that's a really cool concept, because a lot of the work that happens behind the scenes is just people driving these processes and operations in often quite robotic ways. And so now there's an opportunity to do the more repetitive menial tasks with software bots instead. And so we do a lot of work in healthcare, and here's a stat, right? So the majority of healthcare workers actually self-report that they spend a lot of time on manual data entry. This could be copying data between different systems, like insurance portals or different internal EHR systems. It's very inefficient, and it's very prone to error, and those errors are costly, both from a clinical and outcome standpoint as well as a financial standpoint. But this problem isn't unique to healthcare, right? It exists pretty much in almost any industry. And I think basically what we're seeing is a lot of organizations taking on what I call organizational debt. So for the programmers out there, we think of tech debt, right? This is kind of like companies solving these problems short term by just throwing more bodies at it, in a way. Why? Well, because traditionally, these are typically the technology options you have to make things more efficient with technology. If you're using a vendor, you may be asking them to build a new feature, to upgrade their platform. It's tough because oftentimes customers have different needs and wants, but the SaaS vendor, they want to sell a consistent product and make it robust and maintainable. And so that conflict often leads to not a lot happening on that front. And so sometimes it gets so bad that people want to switch, right? And in healthcare, this can literally be a multi-billion-dollar switch and just take years to implement. You have to transfer a bunch of sensitive data, you have to retrain hundreds of staff, and so it's quite costly and risky as well. And then of course you can always build, but depending on your size, that could be the most expensive option, right? Maybe in trying to solve problem one, you actually introduce two others, or by the time that you're done, your needs have already changed. And so the problem with these three is that all of them are costly and risky and time consuming. So it's no wonder really that many have opted to just, hey, let's just hire some more people, And if it's too expensive to hire people onshore, let's just hire people offshore. And so I think that's what's led to this current status quo where there's a lot of manpower that's used for things that, in my opinion, aren't well suited for, it's not the best match of human capabilities and potential to the task at hand. So what can we do better? It's essentially to restructure the workforce so that we can have machines do what they do best and we can maximize human potential. So here are just some of the benefits of RPA, which stands for Robotic Process Automation. So I've been talking about software robots driving these processes. So that's what that term stands for. Some people get confused. They think it's, it's physical robots doing things. It's not. It's more, if you imagine, your browser being driven, for example, to search for something or click for something and copy data from here to there, performing robotic tasks, meaning tasks that can be defined with rules. And so here are some of the benefits, right? So it doesn't require you to alter the current system. A lot of the time, especially older, bigger organizations, it may be practically very difficult to do so, to rip out everything root and stem. And oftentimes it's not just one system, right? It may be a dozen or 20 different systems. Because you don't have to rip out everything, it also allows you to maintain an understanding of the workflow, which in turn lowers your risk of implementation, because worst case scenario, you can always just fall back on the status quo. Again, a big part of the benefit of RPA is that it allows us to maximize human potential, right? Instead of, for most people, when they're doing these really menial, repetitive things, it's not really utilizing their full potential. And these two things here, scaling up and down, the agility and flexibility has been invaluable as well, especially now during COVID times when a lot of companies find it harder to forecast demand. There have been shocks up and down, and it's very difficult sometimes to scale quickly with a human workforce. But if you have bots in place, they can literally duplicate themselves and work perfectly consistently, instantaneously, to scale with, say, a sudden surge in demand, or if things are trending down, you don't have to furlough a bunch of staff and things like that. And of course, another benefit, they don't get sick. They can work whenever, right? So work at night, over weekends. I've oftentimes heard that insurance portals or other platforms are especially slow during normal work hours because that's when everyone else is on it. And so bots don't have to collide with that. Now, why now, right? So I think COVID has been on everybody's mind for the past 6 months or so. And from what I've seen, there was a pre-existing trend towards RPA, but I would say that COVID has kind of exacerbated the need and will likely accelerate adoption. And there's more reasons, but three of the main ones here is efficiency is no longer a nice to have, right? When things are good, when the economy is doing well, yeah, it'd be nice to save on some costs, but if there's a ton of revenue, if everything's going great, it's not necessary. Well, these days, oftentimes it is necessary, and oftentimes it can be the difference between profitable or unprofitable, or surviving or not surviving. And then coming back to the agility point, right? So again, when things are normal, when things are good, it's easier to forecast, right? So it's easier for you to plan ahead with recruiting and training and turnover and things like that. But from what I've seen from my clients, it's just been a ton of uncertainty, right? Both in terms of demand and policy and what's going to happen with the virus and the economy and all that. And so bots offer agility, which is even more valuable in these times. And of course, here we have robustness as well, in the sense that bots really are unaffected by pandemics. So the clients that we had that already had bots in place, they were really grateful when this happened because it didn't disrupt their operations. But I've heard of others, that literally had thousands of people working offshore in India that suffered, major problems when India went on lockdown, and they have since actually gone on a second lockdown. And there's people just scrambling to get workstations at home in a compliant and secure way, with often just 24 or 48 hours notice. And so that really hurt their capacity. And so I believe that going forward, offshoring is going to be a less attractive option in the future, because COVID's likely going to be around for a little while, and other pandemics can happen as well. And so bots now become a relatively more attractive way to drive your operations. Let me just stop right there, because I just threw a lot of information, and see if there's any questions or anywhere I could add a little more clarity.
Yeah, thanks so much, Henry. That was fascinating for sure. And as someone who does not work directly in the tech space, and certainly not with RPA, it's actually really interesting to learn even the jargon of how you're talking about some of these concepts. And I have some questions, so
Absolutely.
I think we're going to transition to the Q&A/discussion part of the evening, but feel free to throw any slides or aids back up on the screen if you so choose. But I think overall, for the uninitiated among us, including myself, I work in healthcare. Actually, I don't think I told you that. I work in healthcare, but I don't work as like a primary technologist or whatever you want to call it. I am doing, data analysis stuff in healthcare. But what, my ears perk up when I hear things like, oh, we can extract, pieces of information from, I don't know, let's say a PDF or something, and do that without me having to go in there every time and open a file, copy paste, throw it in a spreadsheet type thing. So is that like a good use case for something like RPA, or can you talk?
No, absolutely. So I think what you're talking about is, hey, can we gather data, right, from many disparate sources, and sometimes they're well structured, sometimes they're less well structured. Can we do it in a scalable and consistent way, right? And RPA is an excellent use case for that. Very often, on the operational side and revenue cycle side of things, a lot of it just comes down to, moving data around, right? When we do claims processing, for example. Hey, let me make sure that I have all of the clinical data that I need and the authorization data that I need to submit this claim. And then let me make sure that the insurance company has adjudicated the claim. I know what the status is. I know why they denied it, if they denied it. I know how much they paid, if they paid it. I want to make sure I get the payment. I want to make sure it actually hit the bank. I want to make sure that the payment gets posted into my billing system, right, for the right service, and everything. And I want to tag my denial management, all that stuff. So it helps tremendously, both from a reporting standpoint, like you're saying, or data analysis standpoint, data gathering standpoint, but also an operational standpoint, and actually carrying out these tasks.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, just to build off on that, that sounds actually like a great, in a prior life, I did work at an insurance company, which shall remain unnamed.
Okay.
I was at Oscar, and actually in the utilization management department, which is not claims, but very similar in terms of ops and processes. In some ways, there are a lot of parallels, and all the steps that you just described, in that end-to-end process of like getting a case or a claim or whatever it may be, and like tagging it, identifying it, cataloging it, blah, blah, blah. Like that was for sure where a lot of people hours, I should say, went. And a lot of it is doing the same like point and click kind of thing, right? Day in and day out. So
yep.
Is there like a specific, whether it's claims or some other industry, that you can give us a really good illustration of like what the project was and how you achieved the goal using RPA?
Yeah, sure. I guess the one that's closest that just pops to mind is claim statusing, right? So we're working with a client in Texas. They're an infusion therapy provider, and they had, I think it was 184,000. I think it was maybe 184,000 open claims, meaning unpaid claims with an open balance that needed to be checked. Okay, so for those who don't know what this means, it means you have to go to the respective payer portals. You have to perform the claim search of, the subscriber ID, the name of the patient, the data source, a bunch of different data fields. Try to find the matching claim, and then see what's going on with it. And sometimes maybe it's just still pending. Sometimes maybe it's gotten paid. Sometimes maybe it's gotten denied. Maybe sometimes information is missing. But it's important for providers to do this on a regular basis to make sure that they can optimize on their reimbursement. It's an extremely cumbersome process. So we just built out bots for the 12 biggest payers out there for this particular thing, but probably in general. And you know, it was definitely a challenge, but the project was quite successful. You know, so they were understaffed, and they had 11 open positions that would have been required to do this work, right? Which they no longer needed to do because the bots could do it. And that's not even counting, the time that it saved the current team, as well as all the benefits from accuracy and speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, that's huge amount of work. It sounds like, but
it is.
yeah, I mean, and speaking of, I actually want to circle back maybe to even a higher level concept of bot. When you reference bot, it was good that you clarified that you're not talking about little like Roombas going around and like doing
right.
But again, for people who are maybe not technologists themselves but know some of the jargon, could you put together the puzzle pieces a little bit for us in terms of how is RPA related to, or is it not related to things like all the buzzwords that are going around these days, right? Like AI, machine learning, blah blah blah. Is it one part of like a spectrum of tools in that suite, or is it something different? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great question. Both from what I see and people that I talk to, what they see, there just seems to be a lot of hype about AI, basically, in the market. Whether you're trying to pitch investors or you're trying to pitch clients or whatever, people have different standards, for what AI means. Some people think that RPA is AI because, it's like a machine being smart and like doing things that a human can do. I follow, a much more stringent definition of AI. So I would say kind of vanilla RPA does not count as AI, but it's very easy to plug in AI capabilities into RPA work. So to give an example, right? So how would I define AI? I would define AI as the capability to solve a problem which we cannot describe as a process. Okay, so for example, think about people that know you, Semi, right? They could all recognize your face, right? I could recognize your face at this point, right? How would you just put that into a process, in like an instruction? It's almost impossible. What I'm going to say? Okay, you got two eyes. The proportion is approximately this. But there's no way I could give you like a unique instruction that would only identify you and not some other person, right? And so that's the class of problems that I think AI and machine learning solves. And so the way that we teach those programs, instead of writing code of if-else statements and things like that, we are teaching something called supervised learning, right? So I can give them 1,000 pictures of you, right? Yeah. Or I can give them 1,000 pictures of which 400 are of you, for example. And so this is called a tagged data set. And then I can perform supervised learning to essentially train models to classify a certain input, and the input will in this case be a picture. There's a picture of a person, and it goes through this model, and the output will be either it's semi or it's not semi, right? And so there are techniques for doing that, and that's essentially what machine learning is. RPA will almost always fall into the bucket of more if-else statements, and it could be very complex, right? It could be like, hey, if the payer is Aetna and the diagnosis is autism, and there was no prior authorization on file, and blah, 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 then do this, this, this. And it could be a very complex kind of logical tree, but it could still be defined as such. So I think that's an important distinction.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think that is fundamentally two different kind of categories of things that we're talking about here. But actually piggybacking off of that is RPA, or I guess, yeah, is sorry, I'm trying to use the actual
robotic process automation.
I wrote it down. It's in front of me. Robotic process automation. Is that just then a series of algorithms? Is that a kind of algorithm? Is that, and of course, like, I feel like people have philosophical differences in how they define all of these things, especially since they're all evolving over time now. But yeah, how would you kind of describe that relationship if there is one?
Yeah, depends how we define algorithm, right? If algorithm is just, hey, transform some input into some output, then in a way, AI could also classify as that.
Yeah.
I think the difference is kind of how that algorithm comes about, right? If it comes about descriptively, meaning like I'm explaining how you convert this input into an output, then in my opinion, it's not AI.
Okay.
If I cannot descriptively explain how to convert the input into output, instead I have to teach you by example, then that would fall under kind of the AI umbrella, in my view.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I actually, again, totally, we're keeping it casual, right? I was a brain and cog major in college, neuroscience, and a lot of the ways that people describe AI is also a lot of the ways they describe actual, like human learning. And of course, because it's all modeled off the same concepts, I think. So
Yep. Mm-hmm.
it's interesting, good throwback to to undergrad. But
Yeah, for sure.
cool. And actually, now circling back to RPA, our main topic. I was going to ask you about this earlier, actually, but then we veered off into philosophical highfalutin territory. But what's you described a process where at the end of the day, it sounds like, oh, all these this number of headcount was needed, right, to like manually extract all this data, blah, blah, blah. And I know a lot of people, including some of my friends, you know where I'm going with this, are worried about, the bots are coming to take our jobs. And so literally, are the bots coming to take our jobs, Henry?
It's an excellent question, and I appreciate the candor, right? Because I think it's an important issue to address. I think bots are coming for the more menial jobs. Depending on how you view it, my opinion is like jobs that probably shouldn't have been given to humans to begin with, right? In my view, is always kind of a patch solution anyway. Will that destroy certain jobs? Yes. Do I think it will create other jobs? I do. I do. And I think those other jobs will be better at utilizing human creativity and potential, really. And another way to think about this, right, is just, hey, man, this is not the first time this type of kind of revolution has occurred, right? I mean, if we think about agriculture, think about manufacturing, similar things have happened there. Would we really want to go back and just put a ton of people in factories, and have those horrible working conditions? It would create a lot of jobs. Would that be beneficial for society? I think not, right? Same thing with agriculture. Would it be beneficial to put thousands or millions of people back in the field, right, to work these crops? It would create a lot of jobs, but I don't think that would be good for mankind, right? And so, in a way, I think what's happened there, in my opinion, has been progress, and we're seeing a similar thing now happening in the digital world, right? So instead of having these menial repetitive tasks being done manually in the digital world, let's have machines do that, so we can free up, right, all that manpower to do higher value, higher impact, and frankly, just more fun things to do as well.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think actually on a personal note, that sounds or resonates at least with how I've been thinking about it as well. Is you would hope that the human brain, which is phenomenal, can be used for things other than copying and pasting things from from spreadsheets or logging into portals or what have you. So
exactly. And I want to be sensitive too, right? Because I think, imagine people probably think that, maybe that's easy for you guys to say, right? And I want to empathize with that too. I think that it's going to take a transition. For people who held those types of jobs, there's going to be some transition and retraining necessary, right? And it'd be great, if companies, if the government can help with that. Ultimately, it's to everybody's benefit, right? But it's essentially kind of retraining the workforce, right, to take on higher value tasks.
Right. Yeah, and actually on that note, are there some examples of things that RPA is not well suited for, that you can, give us some
Mhm.
hope that we'll be doing these things?
Sure. Sure. I think so. To me, human connection things,
Hmm.
I think, will be difficult to replicate. So, say the work of a nurse,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Or somebody, or, um, someone who takes care of um, old people, for example. It's, I think that's going to be hard to replicate, that human touch, that human connection, to replicate that with bots. That would take a long time, I think. Um, I also think that certain, not everyone will agree, but things that require more case by case judgment.
okay.
Um, God, what's a good? I don't know. What is a good example right now? I mean, some people will say medical diagnosis. Some people will say bots are better, right? Um, but I think things for which, coming back to the algorithm example, things for which there is no clear descriptive way yet
Hmm.
to define that algorithm. I think we're not quite there yet to have bots and AI replace those capabilities. Could it happen in the next 10 years? It could, it could. I mean, I think a lot of companies are kind of banking on that, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And if we look further than a decade, I think the things like strategic thinking, creativity, human connection, human touch,
Yeah.
human relationships,
Yeah.
I think those things will last longer in the human realm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think, yeah, my mind went straight to creativity. I was like, maybe everyone can just, have more time to compose music or do dance or whatever,
Yeah.
for going forward. And also, like, hugely, I think a lot of this is just empathy. Like you're saying, empathy and compassion are probably not things, I hope, that you can teach bots to do. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they can perform some facsimile of that, but the real kind of underlying emotion.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. We'll see, I guess. But yeah, no, I'm with you in the sense that I think that will take a long time to replicate.
yeah, hopefully that doesn't get replaced. But yeah, it's a good thought to have, that the bots are not coming for our jobs is the conclusion to that.
Yeah.
And let's see. Oh, yes, I actually should have asked this before, but I forgot to ask you about, you introduced a little bit about what Simple Fractal does, your company, but do you have a mission statement? Is it like a formal mission statement that you'd like to share with us, or what is the overall
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very much in this realm, about this that we're seeing. To me, I see it as progress that's ultimately better
yeah?
for humans, right? So it's about maximizing human potential,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we're going to be stuck in menial labor, it's holding us back, I think, right?
Yeah.
So again, coming back to example, like imagine just for a moment we went back a few thousand years, and we have people just, all we do is work in the fields, right? And I'm not trying to be insensitive to people who still do that today, but it's if now knowing what we can do with our time, going back to that would seem to just take all that,
Yeah.
both value and just human experience just away, right? And so if we look at that going forward, I think there's going to be a similar
Yeah.
situation, just again in the digital world, where hey, if we can relieve mankind from that type of work, which usually is not that enjoyable. I've seen, I have a few anecdotes on that as well, but it's not like, in fact, a lot of companies suffer from a lot of turnover that come with that, because they just, when people look under the hood and they're like, wait, this is what I have to do.
Right.
There's only so much you can take, right? And yeah, it's not fun work to do. So I think at the end of the day, it comes out to, hey, let's make the most out of human potential,
Yep.
and maximize that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I think the whole thing, possibly can be framed as like a resource allocation issue, where most people, I think, given the choice, would probably not want to do, or, what's the thing in like economic, just like make widgets or whatever it is, day in
Hmm.
without any variation from that. And I think you're right. I think most people probably encounter at some point in a day job where all you're doing is doing the same thing over and over, repetitive tasks. They're probably not going to score super high on any sort of like employee satisfaction,
Right.
surveys. So, yeah, actually, do you care to share an anecdote or two on how RPA kind of alleviated that problem?
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, actually, the first thing that comes to mind is from years ago. It was the most. This was 7 years ago in Florida, and we were in this hospital, and so it's a windowless room, and we're getting a tour of the whole hospital, right? And so okay, it's a windowless room, and there's maybe 10 people there, middle age, sitting and working with two workstations.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, what happens here, right? And they're like, oh, we're in this transition period with EHR systems, and right now the the emergency room, like the system they have there is not the same
Yeah.
as the adjoining hospital. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? So basically, right? So say you have some sort of emergency and you get admitted to the ER, and they take, you know, all of your vitals and your medications, all this information, right? Insurance, all this stuff into their system, and then they're like, hey, you got to stay overnight for a couple of days, and you become an inpatient at the hospital. They're like, okay, blank slate, we got nothing. And I was just so shocked at the time, because I was like, how could this be? You know, that just seems so terrible. And I was like, how long until this is not going to be the case anymore? They're like, probably 2 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, oh my god. So, and who knows, maybe it took longer. Usually these things take longer. And I just remember I was just shocked at the time. And sadly, these days I'm like less shocked, just because I've seen similar things, kind of over and over, right? Once you kind of look under the hood, for most people, like us consumers, like we don't know how things happen behind the scenes, right? But in doing this work, we kind of lift the lid and we look into, okay, how the actual operation is being done. And very rarely, do I see something that's like a well-oiled machine, everything is working as designed, and everybody's happy. It's usually quite messy, and it's usually quite labor intensive in that way, and yeah, not in a good way.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yes, I will, again, no names required, but one place where I was at, the hospital system had different EMRs between departments within one
Uh-huh.
hospital. And I was like,
Yeah, yeah. No, I've seen that too. I've seen that too. Sometimes there's different specialties, and there's like an EMR that's better for this thing, and they can't get a centralized patient chart because some data lives there and some data lives there, and it's just it's not a good situation.
and like you, I was like, how is this possible? But apparently
Yeah,
not, that is not abnormal in the field. And yeah, and sometimes people are like, why do you work in healthcare data? And I'm like, something perversely attracts me about the fact that these these problems are so complicated and thorny. And frankly, I'm not the one doing
yeah,
the infrastructure work or doing any of this like pipelining or nothing. I'm not working with the plumbing, but uh, I don't know. It is interesting. Like people, I feel like interoperability, is that the word, of like EMR
yeah. Interoperability. Yeah,
and still is. And I think you're exactly right. When patients go to the doctor's office and they're like, hi, why do I have to tell you my, memorized
hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely still an issue, I think.
Still very much an issue, and that's why I think, I mean, RPA, again, coming back to that, I feel like it's a new promising way to deal with it. Because I remember, I mean, interoperability has been an issue for at least 10 years, I want to say. And like you said, it's not like it's been solved. And I think it's because, there's just been so many barriers to making different systems talk to each other, in a way that's secure, and in a way that is, not against somebody's incentive, right? I think a lot of EHRs also, when the incentive money came out there for meaningful use, there was just this race, right, to grab market share. And a lot of people just, unfinished products just go sell, because the providers knew if they just adopt something, improve meaningful use, they're going to get a grant from the government. And so you end up with this super fragmented super fragmented market, and then each EMR company is trying to grow, but they hold the data hostage, right? So they're like, hey, oh, you want to switch? Okay, you can switch, but we're not going to cooperate in transferring the data.
Yeah.
Right? That's on you. And just things like that just made it really challenging. And so I think now, kind of coming back to the organizational debt, right? It's like people have found workarounds by using the human interface. Okay, log on to this portal, look up this patient, grab this data, pull it down, go to this other place, pull it down from there, go to their insurance company, pull it down, blah, blah, blah. And so I think I've even seen this as a job title. It's like called an abstractor.
Yeah.
Someone who abstracts away, right, the different interfaces. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. That's like that's a job title. But essentially RPA is well suited for this, right? Because if that workaround, if that process is well defined, now instead of just being driven manually each time, we can now drive it with bots, right? And the pipeline for the data flow is already there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I wish I had this at my job. We'll talk offline.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens literally everywhere. And then you're like, why do I, don't tell anyone, but why do I have a post-it of like 17 different logins with different passwords for every?
Oh yeah.
So not that I have a post-it password. I don't.
Don't do that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and actually now thinking about the more sort of your own journey and how you came to where you are now, how did you end up, founding and running a company on RPA? What was your kind of path from, well, as far back as you would like to go, actually, until?
Yeah, sure. No, it's yeah. I mean, I started the company. It's been a while, man. It's been 7 years. And it's definitely been a journey, right? We didn't always do RPA.
Yeah.
In fact, when I first went off with my co-founder, it was like, all right, you know what? We feel pretty good. We were young, we were naive, we were like, but I knew that I was naive. But we're like, hey, like we feel like we got some tech skills. There's so many problems in the world. We're just gonna go and pick a problem, and it's gonna be great.
Yep.
And I've since have built a lot more respect for the importance of finding meaningful problems. Right? We were just too young, too inexperienced. We didn't know kind of what problems mattered, right? And so after dabbling in a few things, we were like, okay, you know what? Why don't we just partner with people who like really know about their problems, like industry veterans that have a very good idea of how technology is applied today and what all the pain points are and like what would matter, right? And so we became just a software consultancy, and it's like we partner with people in many different industries. Healthcare was one of them, and but also many others. And it became much more driven from, hey, here's a meaningful business problem to solve. Can you help us solve it with technology, right? Which requires, both the business understanding and the design of the product, and as well as building it, right? It's a whole, more of a packaged skill set. And then in recent years, that kind of naturally nudged us in the RPA direction, because we had people in healthcare, revenue cycle consultants, and the like, who would know again about the problems, and they're like, hey, we got huge problems here. Can you solve it? And it just so happened that the solution in this case was to drive it with bots. And then that was a pretty good fit also with like our history in terms of skill set, because the one and only company that I worked for before is called Yipit Data. It's still around today. It's very successful. I was an early engineer there, and what we used to do was just scrape. We had, I remember the time, I was involved in architecting the way that we'd scrape things, and we had, I think it was 800 different targets to scrape, and these websites would change all the time, right? So we need to have good infrastructure to detect breakages and have efficient ways to fix them, right? And that it was several years later, I was able to take that experience and then build upon it, right, and apply it to RPA. So in a way, scraping is just a lower form version of RPA, right? It's just, you're typically on public websites, you're typically only performing read operations, right? Scraping data off of something, you're not actually, saving or creating or editing anything. But otherwise, it's similar in concept. And so since then, because of the we work with a healthcare provider. Our first 2 engagements were very successful. In the first year, we achieved like a 4x ROI, to the tune of millions of dollars per year. And with the projected 5-year ROI being like 13x, and we're like, wow, like this thing can really make a difference, right? And so since then, we've grown with this particular client now to, I think it's almost 30 different bots at this point. Different use cases, and it's been awesome actually expanding with them. But now we're also trying to expand, just more widely, and really repeat this type of success.
Okay. Yeah. And on that topic, actually, I was going to say a lot of just because I've been in healthcare my whole career, I can imagine so many use cases.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are others. Like, is your mind going to, I don't know, finance or other industries or other places like that?
Yeah. No, I mean, we've been familiar with a couple actually. So, like I said, it's not really limited to healthcare. I mean, even though that's where I kind of want to focus my energy, financial services has a ton, right? So we've been working with, say, private equity firms. They have a bunch of LPs or limited partners, right, that have invested into them. They need to know on a regular basis, quarterly, sometimes monthly, hey, what's going on with my investments? All that reporting is done extremely manually.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. There's something called, net capital calls, which means, hey, if I'm a limited partner and I've committed X million dollars, I don't necessarily pay all that money up front, right? It's more like when the PE firm makes the investment, they will do a capital call, being like, hey, now I need that money, right? So, and also all this stuff is done completely manually. So there's a ton of use cases, I would say, in financial services. Insurance, huge. Property casualty insurance. We're working with a firm. It was actually quite impressive. I mean, there's literally hundreds, like 400 data fields or so that's necessary to like produce a good policy. And it's crazy, issuing the quote, and entering the policy. There's a ton of compliance. Also very good for RPA. And also recently, I'm talking to real estate. So if you're a real estate company and you manage hundreds of buildings, managing things like rent, utilities, service requests, chargebacks, certificates of insurance, all this stuff. I mean, there's software that exists for that, right? But they're not that good, and so there's a ton of manual work still required. So I think, I mean, the potential is massive for RPA in many industries, and I'm open to them, right? It's just for healthcare, it's been interesting because in healthcare there's a dual impact, because it's both about making the processes more efficient, right, and reducing costs, but it's also about improving revenue, right? Because most providers just get denied all the time because they didn't file their insurance claims right, and that literally can equate to many millions of dollars, right, each year, and they're just due to human error. And so if you can introduce bots that mitigate or eliminate human error, you're directly improving the top line as well. And so that's, it's a very powerful combination. And the thing with healthcare is just it's harder to get in, but I feel like, we've already had, proven track record of success that for us, might make more sense to pursue the healthcare opportunity.
Yeah. And I think the problems will, unfortunately for us, fortunately for Simple Fractal, be limited in scope. I can see you chipping away at healthcare problems for a long time to come, but maybe you will solve them,
If I can just contribute a little bit, I will be happy. I mean, I think the stat is it's $1 trillion, okay? Just administration, not like the actual giving the care and stuff, just the paperwork and dealing with insurance and the stuff the insurance companies have to do. It's $1 trillion a year, which is it's a very high number, think about it. And so part of the mission is to try to chip away at that, right? There's definitely lots to chip away at, but if I can make even the slightest contribution, I'd be happy.
Yeah, it sounds like you already have. And yeah, that is extremely, I'd like to validate that. That sounds extremely valuable, even from the one scenario that you already presented. So that's awesome. And how,
Thanks.
yeah, of course. And how do you, actually, it's funny you brought up the web scraping thing, because that was the other, I guess, the flip side, or, a parent or child question, whatever you want to call it, to the definition thing that we started talking about at the beginning. But is are bots used for web scraping now, or is that is still a separate process? It's a different thing.
No, yeah, no, they are. I mean, in a way, I mean, it's not much different from the way things used to be, kind of pre RPA, right? I mean, in a way, like, the way Google works as well, right? It's like you have these crawlers, right? And web crawlers or spiders, whether they go out and check all the links across the entire internet. And in a way, I mean, they're still bots,
Yeah.
right? I mean, literally, the way that websites tell Google what to do is by putting a robots.txt file, you
Yeah.
know, in their web directory. So, actually, the concept of bots has been around, I think, for a while, but now it's more about, hey, instead of having these bots just, go over public websites and just scrape data, can we use them to actually do things,
Right. Right.
right? And that's, I think, the realization now that most industries and most companies have had. It's like, whoa, I didn't even think about software that way. I only thought about software as like, hey, maybe I change my vendor and make a better product. I didn't think about using software as driving my processes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think you mentioned earlier that in the scraping example, it's a one directional thing where they're going out and retrieving information, and that's it. And it's like static. There's no like dynamic anything happening there. But it sounds like, but actually related to that, I had a thought, which was earlier we were talking about, like optimal scenario for RPA is when things are very clearly defined, it sounds like, and
Hmm.
there's sort of sequence of what you need to do and where to go, and all those things are predefined, right? But does that mean if one of those variables changes, does the whole bot like sort of give up and is like, I can't do it anymore? Or have you?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. It's a concern that comes up all the time, with people that I work with. Um, the answer is, it depends a little bit on how you build it, right? So there are ways to build it in ways that are extremely brittle, meaning the slightest change will break the bot, right? Like, to give you an example, I mean, there are tools out there that will do like, it's almost like a recording session, right? Like, hey, it will record your clicks and things like that, and then, just for the sake of argument, like, say, the screen size changes, right? Or they move like the button from here to like the right side of the interface, and it's like, oh, I'm clicking, but I can't, find the button, and then it just breaks,
Okay.
right? So that would be a very brittle way
Yep.
of building something. A better way would be to, like, attach to some sort of identifier to the button, for example, and that way it doesn't matter if it moves anywhere on the page, right? The bot's still going to find it. But if the process itself changes, or regulation changes, or something like that, it is true that the bots as they stand would break.
Okay.
Does that mean, RPA is no good? Absolutely not. It just means that they need to be maintained just like any other software.
Yeah.
So, but this is something really important, I think, for companies out there thinking about RPA to understand that it's not gonna be, a one and done. Like, you ideally, you don't really want to work with like a transactional RPA vendor. Someone who's just like, oh yeah, you want to build this thing? Okay, cool. Boom, come in, build it. It works today, and then maybe 3 months later, there's just a tiny change, but they're not there anymore, and now they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. So it's better to work with someone who's going to be with you, right, for a long time, and that if they can build it. So, we like to say we build from first principles, meaning like we have full control to customize where we need to. Not just a lot of people out there just a layer on top of a like a DIY tool, essentially,
Mhm.
where it's like, hey, we'll help you like configure it and some, and sometimes that can work, but it doesn't give you full control, right, and flexibility. And so if you have someone who has that, you're much less afraid of potential changes.
Right.
And that's happened, in our experience, right? That's why, we've been working with our RPA clients for years, right? And it's like sometimes curveballs get thrown at you, like an insurance portal changed the interface,
Yep.
or they introduced two-factor authentication,
Love two-factor.
or they added captchas,
Yeah.
or whatever kind of thing that comes like that. That's like, whoa, if I didn't have people who knew how this was built or could handle these things, it might compromise my investment, right? And so I think just it's important to recognize that that's almost necessary to have someone who can kind of keep maintaining, your solutions, but also not to be deterred from RPA just because a process can change. Oftentimes, I could give you an example of something that actually broke, which is just, the login form on a certain platform just changed.
Yep.
Like all the identifiers, everything changed, and our bot couldn't find where to log in. I mean, we have automated systems in place. It would alert our engineering team, and then we just go in and fix it. And it's very quick to fix. We just have to update the identifier. Right. So oftentimes breakages are not that cumbersome to deal with. It's just important that you have someone who can do it, and someone has infrastructure in place to detect those changes quickly, right, and act on them.
Yep. Sounds like the skeleton is there. It's just you're tweaking a little bit to make sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, actually, we have some questions from the audience that I'm going to.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, thanks to all of those who are out there watching right now. We're going to get through a couple of these or more, hopefully. But the first one is, I will keep you anonymous for now, guys. But, you'll get due credit, I hope. The first question is, have you seen an increased demand of RPA use after a few months of COVID have passed? So you touched on this a little earlier. Yeah, what's the landscape now?
I would say in general, yes, but it's been kind of two opposing forces. Okay. So on the one hand, people are really realizing, oh my God, I got to do something about this. I can't be caught with the same problems over again if there's a second wave. Clearly, this is exposing all that organizational debt that we have taken on. I need to do something. So that mind shift is happening. At the same time, there are two opposing forces. One is a lot of companies are dealing with a hit in revenue, right? Many down as much as 50%, right? And so they're like, just less money coming in. It's harder to make investments, right? So that's been kind of a headwind. Another thing is attention. Okay, so even though the more strategic folks are realizing, okay, wow, like we gotta kind of change the game, we gotta adapt here. If you're more operational, you're worried more about, hey, I need to have a contingency plan for exactly how we're gonna deliver laptops in case people have to go home again, or we need to figure out a new cybersecurity protocol, or we need to figure out, or frankly, a lot of it is also just we need to figure out what the government is saying. A lot, there's been a lot of conflicting messages from different levels of government, and especially in healthcare, it's like, well, what exactly is going to happen? Are you going to ban elective procedures again, which is basically my lifeline in terms of revenue? Is that going to happen or not? And also, everyone's trying to stay out of the news, right? Because you don't want to have negative press associated with, oh, they didn't deal with this right and all that stuff. And so that's very taxing on attention, right? So these have been kind of the opposing forces. But in general, I'm seeing this mind shift, right? That it's helping overcome some of the initial inertia, especially in healthcare or other kind of how to say it, just more archaic industries, I guess. It's like, there's more resistance to change, just a little bit of inertia of trying new things. And in a way, this is kind of like this exogenous shock that's like, wait a minute, before, if I changed something and it broke, I would be an idiot. Now, if I don't do anything, I'll be an idiot. So it's becoming easier to try new things and adopt technology.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's at the end of the day, might not be a bad thing to kind of force things along in that way, because with you, I think healthcare in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to technology, is very behind a lot of other industries because I don't know. Maybe it's just a general risk averseness that kind of pervades everything in the industry, which in some ways is good, so that people aren't doing random things and breaking stuff all the time, right? But
Hmm.
yeah, definitely can be hard to introduce new concepts. But
Right, right.
um, and then we have a couple more questions. Oh, okay. So I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but the question is, are RPA systems currently created bespoke for each client, or is there an out of the box RPA product out there?
Hmm. Great question. Great question. There are. Um, I think it's Automation Anywhere, for example. I mean, I don't know how successful it's been, but they had this concept of like, hey, let's have a bot store, kind of like an app store, but for bots, right? But frankly, I don't think it's been super successful. But don't quote me on that. So there are for certain use cases that are more commonplace, things that almost everyone has to do. Things like, um, for example, claim statusing,
Right.
or eligibility checks for insurance and things like that. There are companies out there that have developed solutions that maybe they're not 100% plug and play, but certainly, big components of it can be reused, right? So for us, I guess claim statusing would be that, for the payers that we have integrated with, that would be something that we could reuse. Um, but it's not a full copy paste, right? Because the input to the bot's gonna look different. Like the AR reports are gonna be structured differently for different providers, and the output's gonna be different, right? So what we do is we don't just fetch the data, we'll actually standardize it, interpret it, and then we'll drive it back into the practice management system and introduce what's called action codes
Okay.
for the collectors to kind of drive their activity in terms of what they're supposed to be prioritizing and things like that. And so, that's going to look a little different, for each user. And then, of course, we're still dealing with a somewhat quite fragmented technology environment, right, in healthcare. And so, if people use different platforms, they're going to require different bots. And sometimes, even if they use the same platform, they perform the process slightly differently,
Oh,
right? And so, but again, it doesn't mean that it has to be a complete rebuild, but it means that it's not as easy as just plug and play.
right, right. Yeah, and actually, related to that is the approach to RPA at Simple Fractal at your company. It sounds like it's a little bit of a, I don't know, somewhere in between maybe bespoke and a plug and play situation. But it sounds like you guys do a lot of just thoughtful consideration of what I like to call sort of like the cause of the problem as opposed to just attacking the symptoms. Whereas like
Exactly. Yeah.
deeper into what, as we said before, you define the button as like the thing that is green and round as opposed to like this thing that's at like XY coordinates right here and doesn't move, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
right, or is that fair? fair?
Yeah. Sure. And I mean, I'd say like our approach has been, it's very much kind of business process first
Mhm.
kind of mentality, right? So if you're working with a DIY tool or an off-the-shelf tool or something like that, you're trying to use it in a way that will automate the process, right? We start with an understanding of the process, right? And we'll build the technology after that. And so, and I think that's actually that's a very, very important thing, because something that I see out there also is like, you may have brilliant engineers, right? And they will do maybe what you tell them to do, but sometimes what you tell them to do isn't exactly what you want them to do. And so it's important to have people who can understand, the business context, what the underlying objective is, so they can make all these judgments, right, and these micro decisions necessary during development.
Mhm.
And so I'd say, that's something that we definitely emphasize.
Mhm.
In terms of the bespoke versus plug and play, our approach so far has definitely been bespoke.
Okay.
Again, start with a business process and build after that, maintain the flexibility to maintain it, in the long term.
Mhm.
In terms of plug and play, what I think may happen, is already kind of starting to happen a little bit, is that it will form organically.
Mhm.
For example, if we're automating a particular platform,
Mhm.
like there's this one platform we've done, dozens of bots on. We
Mhm.
kind of built a specialty and we understand it very well. We almost reverse engineered it, right? And so then, that makes it easier, right, to build more bots on top of it. It also means that very likely these bots are fixing imperfections in that product,
Okay.
right? And so therefore, other people who use this product, they see the same imperfections and probably have similar pain points. And so in that sense, it allows us to leverage, our experience and expertise in more efficient ways.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, philosophically, I'm with you there. I think without the context and understanding of the domain and the problem itself, you're not solving it fully. You're just kind of taking pieces off, but not doing the full and probably better quality solution. It comes from doing that kind of deep dive. So yeah.
Right. Right.
Um, Another question from the
Sure.
thanks guys for the questions. Keep them coming.
Great questions.
Yeah. Okay. Related to what you said about web scraping, how robust are your RPA solutions against software updates in the systems you're interacting with? I think we sort of started covering this one, but you want to dive in deeper to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. No. So, coming back to this idea of this I'm thinking about this platform that we're doing a lot of bots on, right? Because we've done it over the course of 2 years at this point. I think looking at history is probably the most indicative. So, in these 2 years where we stood up, again, dozens of production bots, they've been very robust, honestly. There hasn't been anything where, oh my God, a complete rebuild is necessary, or, it's anything more than, a smaller fix that's necessary. And we've maintained longevity in all of the bots that we built.
Okay.
So in that sense, I think it's been fairly robust, and there's definitely been software updates, right, in the underlying system in these 2 years. Now, that's not to say that every system is going to be like that, or that, next month they're not going to come with like this massive change of like, hey, we actually acquired a different company and we're switching to their product. So, that could happen, right? But again, I think instead of speculating, it's just helpful to look into the past. And so what I have is, 2 years of data right on this, and it hasn't been a problem for us.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and software updates. I feel like I was just commenting the other day to someone who is a software engineer that just seems like everything has gotten so complicated. Like there's just layers upon layers of everyone. Anything with software engineering is just very convoluted. It seems. So anytime you touch something, except that's the fact that nobody would have known. So
that's correct. That's why, coming back to those 3 technology options from before, that's why upgrading your current system is so challenging for your vendor, because they're dealing with like, oh, you know what, I have to maintain like 3 different versions on the on-premise version, and I have this tech debt and I didn't design this database the right way, and oh my God. And then we had to roll out this mobile app as well, and I can't mess up the endpoints to that, and blah, blah, blah. And so, it's so difficult. I can empathize with them, right? They're trying to build one product and sell to many. And then those other companies all coming with different requests of what needs to be done. And so it's really hard for them to prioritize and kind of address all the concerns, right? So in a way, RPA has kind of worked well for them too, right? Our client may have switched platforms if they didn't work with us, right? So it's kind of made their SaaS platform more sticky, and it fixes the imperfections in a way that adapts to the needs of their particular customer, right? So it's kind of been a very interesting dynamic, but I would say overall, it's like a synergistic relationship.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, we actually are at the end of time. This hour flew by, to be honest with you, because it was fast.
It did.
So I think, yeah, I'm getting the signal. So, gang, I know you're there, but you're not really there. Thank you so much for providing the time and space and forum for this. And Henry, thank you so much for joining us today. And it's been
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course.
My pleasure.
I feel like I want to continue this conversation with you offline over Zoom.
We absolutely can.
It was great to see you again, and thank you so much. And I think that is it. So thanks, guys, for the questions. Thanks for listening, and have a great evening. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.